Hey friends, before I jump into the video, I just wanted to express my gratitude and appreciation for each and every one of you who watches these videos, likes them, and interacts with us either over comments or by emailing us, which you can find down below. Ever since Rohit and I made this channel, it's been a really exciting time, and so we have you to thank for it. Now onto the video. As many of y'all may know, Rohit and I started this channel to provide you consulting resources that we wish we had whenever we were going through the process from a non-target school. But in today's video, I want to take a bit of a different path than strictly talking about consulting. What I want to talk about today is failure and disappointment, which I think no matter whether you're going down the consulting route or whatever you're doing in life, these are things that you'll encounter and need to understand how to deal with. And there are two reasons why I wanted to talk about this today. The first one is that even though Rohit and I are consultants right now, and presumably you watching this video are interested in consulting or at least trying to understand what it's like, there's a lot more to us than that, right? When we look back at the end of our lives, we're not going to be thinking about consulting or the fact that we did or didn't do it. There's so much more that makes us who we are. Our dreams, our ambitions, the people that we love, all that kind of stuff, right? And so with that, Rohit and I want to make our channel more than just talking about consulting. Of course, for the near future, we have a lot of videos to cover, a lot of content we want to produce specifically as it relates to consulting. But in the next couple of years, we'd love to branch out more and talk about things that genuinely interest us outside of career things, whether it's entrepreneurship, productivity, travel, whatever it might be. Simply put, we are much more than consulting, both Rohit and I, and also you. And so we want our channel to reflect that. The second thing, and probably more important as it relates to failure and disappointment, is that yesterday I received pretty big news, and news that came to me as a disappointment and what I would describe as a failure. And so I thought, while I'm feeling this, it would be really useful for me to talk about it and how I'm dealing with it, especially as it will relate or might already relate to things that some of you all might feel as you go through the consulting process, given that it's so competitive and such a numbers game at the end of the day. But really, like I mentioned earlier, this could be about anything in life. We're going to need to learn how to deal with and understand failure so we can mitigate it and learn how to go past it whenever we're experiencing these things. Going into the video, I'll try to segment it into two parts. In the first one, I'll talk about the context of this failure, why it is affecting me, why I care about it, and what it was. And then second, I'll talk about the lessons and the themes that I've both learned and am continuing to try to implement in my life to overcome it and continue looking forward positively. And of course, and like in everything in Rohit and I's channel, this is a two-way street, I hope. This is something where I'm sure that many of you all have advice and lessons that you'd want to give me and the other people watching these videos. And so if you have any advice or things that you think could be helpful for me or anyone else, please make sure to leave them in the comments below. I'd love to see how you all deal with situations like this. So anyway, let me provide the context to this failure and the disappointment I'm feeling. It all starts around something called the Schwarzman Scholarship, which is actually something I mentioned, I think, in a networking video when I mentioned the ways in which I try to network and reach out to people. At the basis, this is a scholarship that was started by Steve Schwarzman, the CEO and founder of Blackstone, which is, I think, the largest private equity firm in the world. And so the bottom line is this guy is incredibly rich, incredibly powerful, and incredibly influential. And he saw two things in the world. The first one was that in the last 500 years, every time that there was a central power or a number one world power like the US currently is, and then a rising second power that will overcome this first power, like China, 75% of the time in the last 500 years, those two countries or states have gone to war. So that's the first thing Steve Schwarzman recognized. And second was that with all of the Western business leaders that he knew or interacted with on a regular basis, many of them didn't have an understanding of China from a political, social, economic, historical lens, and thus weren't able to build friendships because they also didn't have friends or peers in China as well. And so he took all of this, and basically that's where the idea of the Schwarzman Scholarship came about, which is a one-year master's program at Tsinghua University, which is arguably the best university in China, that brings together around 150 to 200 global young leaders from around the world to spend a year learning together about China, about how it's going to impact their industry, so that when they go on later on in life, they not only have an understanding of China from a historical, political, and just very personal perspective, but then also have friends who are both Chinese in China and maybe non-Chinese people in China or outside of China who are actively thinking about how China affects what they're doing in the world. And so that was kind of his vision for the Schwarzman Scholarship, and definitely a vision that I fell in love with. Especially over the last 5 to 6 months as I've been applying. So you might be thinking at this point, okay, Neil, that's a maybe cool scholarship. Maybe some of you might not think it's that cool, but why does it impact you, and how does that go along with the failure and disappointment that I might be feeling right now? Well, to make a long story short, for the last 5 to 6 months, I've been working really hard to both prepare my application and then also to prepare for the interviews, because luckily I got an interview for the Schwarzman Scholarship. and I heard back yesterday that I got waitlisted. Of course, that's not a complete failure. That still gives me hope that it could be a yes, but as many of y'all might know, if you've ever been on a waitlist or can empathize with someone on the waitlist, that is a situation that is totally out of my control, and for now I'm kind of assuming that things won't work out my way so that I'm able to still continue pursuing other opportunities and just kind of keeping my head up. So you might be thinking then at this point, I've described to you the scholarship and you might think, okay, it's cool, but Neel, why were you interested in it? And then how did this scholarship bring about failure or disappointment for you? But the reason I was incredibly interested in the Schwarzman scholarship comes down to honestly a lot of reasons, but I'll list 3 here right now. The first one is that I was incredibly interested in China, both from a culture, language, and a travel perspective. I was able to visit China really early on in college, the summer after my freshman year. And since that point, I've always been hooked on wanting to learn Chinese and going back to China and living there for a significant portion of my life so that I can better understand how this country is going to eventually become the economic center of the world that some people think. The second is that I'm a really, really big people person. I've been lucky in my life that I've been able to be in a lot of cohort-based programs, whether it was in high school where I went to a boarding school, so I lived with my peers and my friends 24/7, to college where I was in a cohort-based scholarship program. I've really thrived in those and enjoyed the relationships, and being a people person, I also just thrive off of the energy of other smart and interesting people as well. And this is exactly what the Schwarzman Scholarship Program is about, both learning from, but then also contributing to the people around you in an incredibly meaningful way. And then lastly, the combination of these two things of traveling and being around awesome people is something that I've been around a lot, like I mentioned. Last summer, I spent 2 months in Taiwan as a Taiwan US scholar, essentially around 45 other American students. And that was probably the 2 best months of my life, both because it combined the cohort aspect, becoming really close with my peers and my friends, and then also the language learning and traveling. I was in Taiwan, like I mentioned, for 2 months, mainly to learn Chinese, but also to travel around and understand and immerse myself within Taiwanese culture. And it was, I literally mean it was the best 2 months of my life. And so I view Schwarzman as a lot of things, but also as kind of an extension of those 2 months, where it would be a year-long program that would probably be the most exciting year of my life. And so I'm rambling on a little bit too much, but the bottom line is I was really, really excited for this program, and I knew exactly how I as a person fit into it well and how it would benefit me. So now let me tell you kind of the time and effort that I put into the scholarship, just to provide a context of how much it meant to me. Starting around December of 2019, I had made up my mind that I was going to apply to the Schwarzman scholarship, and even started doing pretty crazy things to start putting effort towards it. For example, I used to use dating apps, and my philosophy then was, any moment I spend on these apps, I could instead be spending on researching China or working on my essays for something that was due in 10 months. And so I deleted all the dating apps, partially probably because I wasn't seeing any results as well. But you get the point, that I was pretty focused on it, and that focus only intensified about 4 or 5 months out from the due date in September. So around like June, July, that's when I really started ramping up writing my essays. I would spend probably at least 6 to 7 hours per weekend, maybe on average 10 hours a weekend, working on my essays, getting a bunch of my friends and professors who I knew still from my college to help me review them. And huge shout out to them. They were incredibly helpful in that. Anyway, so with all that, I get to a point with my essays and my application where I feel really good about submitting it in September. And lucky enough, I hear back a couple weeks later that I get the interview. And that's a pretty big deal, because I think with Schwarzman, you might expect anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 people to apply, whereas only 300 get interviews, and then there's 150 spots. And so getting to the interview, it's a really good indication that you have a solid chance. It's basically 1 in 2 to 1 in 3 people get it from that point on once you get to the interviews. And so I was incredibly hyped and grateful for it. I spent a lot of time, basically 2 hours a day, preparing for the next 3.5 weeks between when I got notified to when the actual interview was. And so by the end of the process, and by the end of the finish of the interview, I felt really good about how I had performed. And I knew that there was not really much I can do to improve my chances or to get better at interviewing. And so yesterday I heard back, kind of like how I alluded earlier, disappointing news that I had been put on the wait list. And so, of course, some of you might be saying like, Neel, that's still good that you didn't get rejected. You can't complain about that too much, right? And I think y'all are right. There's definitely a positive way of looking at it, but the way I kind of took it is that it's a no for now, and if I'm lucky enough to get off the wait list, which I think we'll see, I don't know, but if I get off the wait list, then I'll be happy. But for now, I don't want to assume or bank on it, And so anyway, after getting that email yesterday, I was a mixture of sad, annoyed a little bit, because I still didn't have a clear answer, although I'm still grateful that there's potential for a yes. And I don't know, it's that feeling of just feeling weird that this thing I had been focusing on for so much of my life for the last 5 to 6 months didn't turn out exactly how I wanted it to. And yeah, I felt like a mixture of honestly of like a little bit of wanting to throw up, feeling a little sad, and then also a little bit embarrassed because there were so many people at Bain, my friends, and other people who had just helped me through the process or who I talked to about it, just because I was really excited about it and this was a big thing going on in my life. And so just the fact that I was going to have to go tell potentially all those 30 to 40 people, hey, like, I don't know yet, I got on the wait list, it was quite embarrassing as well. And so for me, something that forced me to deal with failure and disappointment and really understand what do those things mean, and then how do I mitigate or go through them or work through them in my life. And so that's kind of the context of the scholarship, and then the effort I put in, and eventually how it made me feel when getting the news that I wasn't necessarily wanting to hear. And so there are 3 things that I'm trying to keep in mind so far have helped me deal with it, and also will continue helping me deal with it, that I just wanted to share for y'all, especially as you go through the consulting process, a similarly competitive process where you can't control the outcome, and many of y'all unfortunately will have to deal with the fact that the ideal outcome you were hoping for isn't the one that happens. But I think through these tips and lessons that I've learned, and other ones that you all will share, I think we'll all be better for it and understand how to go through these situations and still look at it with pride and with positivity. So yeah, let's go into these lessons. The first lessons I learned was that it's about the process. It's not about the result. And what I mean by that is the values you have and the character you have and the person you are isn't represented by the outcome of the processes that you go through, but rather how you go through the process. And so one thing I learned throughout the Schwarzman process is that they're of course looking for people who are young global leaders, people who care about collaboration, not just on an individual scale, but on national and international scales, and also people who look to their communities to affect positive change. And whether or not I got this Schwarzman scholarship, by the time I got the interview and by the time I had finished my application, I realized that I encompassed the ethos of what a Schwarzman scholar was, and that was a pretty empowering realization. And of course, that wasn't something that I came to on my own, right? It was because of the input from 20 to 30 different people who helped me craft my narrative about my application and help me kind of figure out who I am in the process. And so I say that to mirror the process that many of you all might be going through right now with casing, and especially if it doesn't work out at the end. The fact that you were able to dedicate so much time to casing, you're able to build what is probably a new skill for you, says a lot about who you are and the kinds of things that you'll do in the future, whether or not it works out or not. That lesson of focusing on the process rather than the result has helped me a lot. And just having the assurance that because I went through this application process with such passion and with such dedication, it assures me that I'll be able to do it again in the future for other things that I find really impactful, and that's what matters, and that's what will end up making me happy in the long run. The second lesson that I wanted to talk about, and something that I've been really trying to keep in mind since the end of my interview, which was about 2 weeks ago, was to be prepared for all outcomes. So to think about all reasonable outcomes that can happen, which in this case, there's either I get rejected or I get accepted. I didn't even know that there was a waitlist option, to be honest, but those 2 options. But for your situation, it could be many more or similar in just a yes or no. But in all options, I found it important to be prepared in all situations. And so when I say prepared, I mean both having plan Bs, but then also mentally being prepared that, hey, like this could very well not work out and life will be okay and life will move on. The way that I handled that in this specific situation was by saying, one, exactly what I just said, which is it is totally fine if I don't get it. There's a lot of successful people who I still look up to who didn't get things that they had applied to, and a lot of people who didn't get the Schwarzman scholarship who will end up still being just as great, if not greater, leaders and people in whatever they choose to do. So that was the first thing I thought of. And then the second thing was just actively planning, okay, if this scholarship doesn't work out, how else can I explore my interests in China, interests in traveling, interests in, the other things that I wrote my application about? And luckily, there's a very similar other kind of Chinese-based scholarship called the Yenqing Scholars Program. And I'm just mentioning these scholars programs in case anyone might be interested. But yeah, there was this other scholarship program that I knew I could apply to because the deadline isn't for another 3 weeks. And so that, just within the last 24 hours of hearing this news, has really helped me refocus my attention that I was putting on this other scholarship now onto this new scholarship that I still have opportunity and hope for. And so that's really helped me stay positive, stay motivated, and kind of just look forward into life. And so I know that's something that I talked about in my story video as being really important for me when I was going through the consulting process, having a really exciting plan B. And I think that'll be true for you all as well. Because let's be honest, there's so many cool things in this world that for us to do. Consulting, for example, or one scholarship here or there isn't the end all be all for an exciting life or for the future that we want. And so let's continue to treat it as such and continue looking for other opportunities. At least that's what I'm telling myself, right? And then the third one, which I think could be the most important and probably the most wide-reaching lesson that I've learned through all of this, is just the power and the importance of being grateful and being appreciative. And this relates to both the opportunity specifically. So for me, the opportunity to apply to the scholarship and really just carve out the time to think about what I want to do in the future and why. But then also just being more generally appreciative, right? I'm sure many of you all are looking at me right now being like, man, this dude is so stupid. He's getting all bummed out about the scholarship, but he works at Bain. He's totally fine, right? And I think you're right? Like, that's something I definitely need to be keeping in mind, is that even though I didn't get this scholarship that I've been focusing on for 6 months, I still have a job that I'm really grateful and appreciative of, and one that I don't need to worry about losing during COVID, which is, you know, a lot more than a lot of people can say. And so that in and of itself is something that I can, you know, think about, and it'll make me feel a bit more positive about where I am in life despite this news that I got yesterday, you know. And it's also the reason why I wanted to start this video off today the way I did, by saying thank you to you all, because even in all of this process, the next thing that came into my mind after learning I didn't get this scholarship was thinking about, okay, now I have more time to put it to the channel. Now I have more time to dedicate towards making more of these videos. Without y'all, I wouldn't have had that motivation to continue being positive or using my time productively. And so I think gratitude and appreciation from the little things to the big things is something that'll be really important. And those are the kind of the three lessons that I wanted to talk about really quickly as it related to how I'm dealing with this failure and this disappointment that I've, you know, encountered over the near past. And I just wanted to end this video by, again, saying thank you if you stuck around all this way from hearing me talk about this scholarship that you probably don't care about, as well as these three lessons I've been trying to stick with. And like I mentioned earlier, if there are any lessons about, you know, any experiences that you've had dealing with failure or disappointment, whether it's career related or not, doesn't matter. I'd love to hear it, whether you want to email it to me or Rohit personally so that we can talk about it more, or whether you want to mention it down below so that you can also share the advice and the things that you learned with everyone else in this community. But again, like I mentioned, Rohit and I really appreciate you all watching these videos, and he'll also return to these videos pretty soon. He's just busy with school and also running a couple of startups. Dude, he's crazy. He'll probably be a successful entrepreneur one day, so just keep that in mind if you ever have money to invest in an entrepreneur. But otherwise, like I always mention, if you enjoyed the video, give us a like. If there's anything you want to mention below, or if there's any videos that you want us to make next, feel free to comment below. And yeah, see y'all next video.